What really happens when an avoidant loses you? Today, I'm revealing the psychology most people never see, from the one gesture that triggers their deepest fear, to the exact timeline of their regret, to what's really happening in their mind after they walk away. And finally, the crushing blow that makes them realize what they've lost forever. This isn't about revenge. It's about understanding the truth they'll never admit. This one gesture may look like giving up, but it actually triggers their deepest fear and makes them chase you. Avoidants are masters of emotional distance. They keep you at arm's length, send mixed signals, and make you feel like you're always the one doing the chasing. Their entire emotional system is built around one core fear: losing control. They create distance not because they don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. They've learned that getting too close means getting hurt. So they keep everyone in emotional limbo where they're close enough to feel connected, but far enough to escape if things get too real. Most people try to win over an avoidant by being more available, more understanding, more patient. They think if they just prove how much they care, the avoidant will finally open up. But this approach backfires every time. Why? Because it gives the avoidant exactly what their nervous system craves: control and emotional safety. When you're always there, always chasing, you become predictable. And predictable means safe. The gesture I'm sharing works because it makes them feel like they might actually lose you. When an avoidant faces real possibility of loss, something fascinating happens. All those walls they built start to crack. The distance they've created suddenly feels too far. This isn't about playing games. It's about understanding psychology and creating genuine connection. Avoidants have a weird relationship with scarcity. When something feels abundant and always available, they don't value it much. But when something becomes scarce, their entire nervous system shifts. Suddenly, what they thought they could take or leave becomes incredibly important. Their brain is wired to only fully appreciate something when there's risk of losing it. When you stop being predictably available, their analytical brain starts asking different questions. Why aren't they texting back? Are they losing interest? For the first time, they worry about losing you instead of worrying about you getting too close. The gesture: stop chasing. The gesture is simple but requires serious self-control. You stop chasing. You stop being the one who always initiates contact. You start mirroring their energy instead of trying to balance it out. When they're distant, you become distant. When they're hot and cold, you become hot and cold right back. But here's the crucial part. You're not doing this to punish them. You're showing them what the relationship actually looks like when both people operate from the same emotional distance. Timing matters more than anything. You can't subtly disappear without context. Instead, gradually shift your energy to match theirs. If they take hours to respond to texts, you take hours to respond to theirs. If they make last-minute plans, you start having your own plans that make you unavailable sometimes. Here's what you cannot do. Don't tell them what you're doing. Don't say, "I'm giving you space." That defeats the purpose. Also, don't do this with anger or resentment. You need to do this from genuine self-respect and detachment, not from trying to teach them a lesson. The key is actually starting to live your own life instead of organizing it around their availability. Make plans with friends. Pick up hobbies. Focus on your goals. When they text while you're busy, don't drop everything to respond immediately. This gesture only works if you're genuinely prepared to walk away. Avoidance can sense desperation from miles away. You have to be genuinely okay with the possibility that they might not step up. What happens when you do this? At first, they might seem relieved, thinking finally they're giving me space. But this relief doesn't last. Within days or weeks, something shifts. They start noticing you're not reaching out as much. They realize you're not always available when they want attention. This is when their real feelings surface. The first sign it's working is usually confusion. They'll start reaching out more, but subtly, maybe random memes or casual questions. They're testing if you're still emotionally available. When you don't respond with the same enthusiasm, they start to panic. Don't expect grand gestures. Instead, you'll notice small changes. They might initiate conversations more, ask personal questions about what you're doing, or get slightly jealous in ways they never did before. Some will try to regain control by being extra distant at first. This is actually a good sign because it means they're feeling the shift. Timeline varies depending on your relationship length. If you dated for months, you might see changes within 2 to 3 weeks. Longer relationships could take a month or two. Stay consistent during this period. One telling sign is when they start making more effort to spend time in person. They might suggest hanging out more or show up places where they know you'll be. Another sign is becoming more emotionally available during time you do spend together. Scarcity makes them realize what they've been taking for granted. Reality check. This isn't a magic trick that transforms every avoidant into the perfect partner. What it does is show you who they really are when they can't take you for granted. Some will step up and show you the love you deserve. Others will find new ways to keep you at arm's length or move on to someone else who will chase them. If an avoidant starts making real effort, pay attention to whether changes are genuine or just temporary panic responses. Real change looks like consistent communication, making concrete plans, introducing you to important people, and having actual conversations about the relationship. Be honest about why you're doing this. If you're trying to control someone or force them to love you, you're missing the point. The real power isn't that it makes avoidance chase you. It's that it puts you back in control of your own life and energy. Remember, you deserve someone who doesn't need to almost lose you to realize your worth. You deserve someone who shows up consistently, not just when they're afraid you might leave. This gesture should never become a permanent way of relating. It's a tool to reset the dynamic and see if they can meet you halfway. Now that you understand what makes them come back, let's look at exactly what's happening in their mind during this process. How long it really takes an avoidant to regret losing you, but they'll never tell you. When an avoidant loses someone they love, it doesn't look like the movies you've seen. There are no immediate breakdowns, no desperate calls the next day, no showing up at your door with flowers and apologies. Instead, their regret comes in waves, in delayed realization, in quiet moments months later when they're alone. It's regret delivered in slow-motion packaging, wrapped in denial, tied with pride, and sealed with stubborn independence. But don't be fooled by the silence. When an avoidant person loses someone who truly mattered, it's not that they don't feel the loss deeply. It's that they feel so much it overwhelms their entire system. They spent a lifetime training themselves to stay safe by staying emotionally distant. So when loss hits them real and undeniable, it challenges everything they built to protect themselves. And that's when they start to process what they've lost slowly, painfully, but inevitably. The first stage happens almost immediately, but you'd never know it. Within the first few days after losing you, an avoidant experiences what I call relief regret. This may sound contradictory, but for someone wired to fear emotional overwhelm, the initial aftermath feels like they can finally breathe again. No more pressure to open up, no more expectations to meet, no more fear of disappointing you. They convince themselves this is what they wanted all along. But here's what's really happening beneath that surface relief. Their nervous system is still in shock. They're running on autopilot, doing their usual routine, maybe even feeling proud that they're handling it so well. But if you look closely, you'll notice the small cracks. They're sleeping more or not at all. They're avoiding places that remind them of you. They're keeping busier than usual. To an avoidant, this stage feels like winning, but it's actually their emotions being temporarily frozen. They're not processing the loss yet because their brain is still protecting them from the full impact. This isn't real relief. It's emotional numbness disguised as freedom, and it never lasts long. The second stage hits around week 3 to 6, and this is when the real psychological warfare begins. The initial numbness starts wearing off, and suddenly they're hit with what feels like random waves of emptiness. They'll be going about their normal day, maybe making coffee or driving to work, and suddenly they feel this strange, hollow feeling they can't quite name. This is when they start noticing your absence in ways that catch them off guard. Your favorite song comes on the radio, and instead of changing it, they sit there feeling something they can't identify. They find themselves reaching for their phone to text you about something small, then remembering you're not there anymore. But here's the thing about avoidance in this stage. They don't call it missing you. They call it being distracted or having an off day. They're masters at reframing their emotions into something more manageable. They might even start dating someone new during this time, not because they're over you, but because they're trying to prove to themselves that they are. They need evidence that they can function without you, that they made the right choice. But the new person feels wrong in ways they can't explain. The conversations feel shallow, the connection feels forced, and they find themselves comparing everything to what they had with you. This is when the first real seeds of regret start growing, but they're still too proud and too scared to acknowledge them. The third stage arrives around month 3 to 6, and this is where things get really intense for them. This is what I call the reality crash phase. By now, their defense mechanisms are exhausted from working overtime, and the full weight of what they've lost starts breaking through. They begin to have these moments of brutal clarity, usually when they're alone and their guard is down. Maybe they're lying in bed at night or taking a shower or just sitting in traffic, and suddenly it hits them like a freight train. They realize you weren't just someone they were dating. You were the person who actually understood their weird sense of humor. You were the one who didn't push them when they needed space, but still stayed around. You were the rare person who made them feel safe enough to be themselves, even if they never told you that. This realization is terrifying for an avoidant because it forces them to admit they were wrong, not just about the breakup, but about their entire approach to love. They start replaying conversations, remembering moments when you tried to get closer and they pulled away. They remember the hurt in your eyes when they shut down, the patience you showed when they were emotionally unavailable. For the first time, they see their behavior from your perspective, and it's devastating. But even in this stage, they won't reach out. Their pride is still too strong, and they convince themselves it's too late, that you probably moved on, that they don't deserve another chance anyway. This is when they start the mental torture of checking your social media obsessively, looking for signs of whether you're happier without them. The fourth stage happens around month 6 to 12, and this is when regret becomes unbearable. This is what I call the ghost phase, because you start haunting every aspect of their life. Even though you're not there, by now, they've tried everything to move on. They've thrown themselves into work, maybe moved to a new place, definitely tried dating other people. But nothing works because they're carrying this heavy weight of realization that they lost something irreplaceable. This is when an avoidant starts doing things that would shock you if you knew. They drive by places you used to go together, not to see you, but just to feel connected to the memory. They keep that sweater you left at their place, telling themselves they'll return it someday, but really they just want something that still smells like you. They find themselves defending you to friends who try to badmouth you, getting angry when people suggest you weren't good enough for them. The regret at this stage isn't just about missing you anymore. It's about recognizing that they sabotaged the best thing that ever happened to them because of their own fears. They start seeing patterns in their behavior, realizing they've done this before with other people, but never with someone who mattered as much as you did. They begin to understand that their need for independence and space wasn't actually protecting them from pain. It was guaranteeing they'd end up alone with their pain, which is so much worse. This is when they might finally start going to therapy, not to get you back, but because they can't live with themselves anymore. But even then, they're processing this loss in isolation because reaching out still feels too vulnerable, too risky. The final stage can take anywhere from 1 to 3 years, and this is when regret transforms into something deeper, genuine remorse and self-awareness. By now, they've stopped trying to run from the pain and started sitting with it. They've finally accepted that losing you wasn't just bad timing or incompatibility. It was a direct result of their own emotional cowardice. This is when they understand that you weren't trying to trap them or take away their freedom. You were offering them unconditional love from someone who actually saw them and chose to stay anyway. The cruelest part of this final stage is that this is when they're finally emotionally ready for the relationship they lost. They've learned to sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of running. They've developed the tools to communicate instead of shutting down. But by now, you've likely moved on with your life, maybe even found someone who can love you openly from the start. So if you're wondering how long it takes an avoidant to regret losing you, the answer is both immediate and forever. They feel the loss right away, but it takes them months or even years to fully understand what they lost and why it was their fault. By the time they're capable of being the partner you deserved, it's usually too late to get you back. Their regret becomes part of who they are, a reminder of what happens when fear wins over love. But their delayed regret doesn't minimize the pain they caused you. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who end up regretting it the deepest. But that doesn't mean we have to wait around for them to figure it out. But here's where it gets interesting. The timeline of their regret follows a specific pattern that most people never see coming. Every breakup an avoidant looks like they just moved on effortlessly. But what's happening in their mind will surprise you. After they end things, they seem cold, detached, maybe even relieved. They might immediately start dating someone new or throw themselves into work like nothing happened. It's confusing, it's painful, and it often leaves you wondering if you ever mattered at all. But the truth? What's happening inside their head is completely different from what they're showing you. The very thing that looks like indifference is actually a complex psychological battle they're fighting every single day. If you don't understand what's really happening in an avoidant's mind after a breakup, you'll keep taking their behavior personally. You'll assume their quick recovery means you didn't matter, that they're happier without you, or that they're just emotionally superior. But when you understand the internal chaos they're actually experiencing, everything shifts. You realize their behavior isn't about you at all. It's about a survival mechanism working overtime to protect them from feelings they can't handle. This understanding doesn't excuse their behavior, but it frees you from the torture of thinking you weren't good enough. What every avoidant experiences after a breakup is immediate relief followed by a delayed emotional crash they didn't see coming. In the first few days or weeks, they feel vindicated. See? I knew relationships were too complicated. I'm better off alone. Their nervous system actually calms down because the pressure of emotional intimacy is gone. Picture this. They sleep better, feel less anxious, and convince themselves they made the right choice. But the relief is temporary, and what comes next catches them completely off guard. Their brain, which spent months or years getting used to your presence, doesn't just forget you existed. And that's where their real struggle begins. The first thing that happens is phantom attachment. Even though they initiated the breakup, their brain starts looking for you in their daily routine. They reach for their phone to text you about something funny. Then remember you're not there anymore. They see something that reminds them of an inside joke you shared, and for a split second, they forget you're gone. This isn't love, it's habit. But for an avoidant, even habitual attachment feels threatening. What makes this confusing for them is that they genuinely believe they wanted space. So, why does their brain keep reaching for you when you spend significant time with someone? Your brain creates neural pathways that expect that person to be there. Breaking up doesn't delete those pathways overnight. It's like muscle memory, but for emotions. Their logical mind says they're better off alone, but their subconscious mind is still looking for the comfort you provided. This creates an internal war that exhausts them. During the day, they might feel confident about their decision, but at night, when their defenses are down, the phantom attachment hits hardest. They remember how safe they felt next to you, even though they spent months complaining about feeling trapped. These moments of vulnerability scare them so much that they often distract themselves with anything they can find: work, exercise, dating apps, or even substances. Then comes the comparison trap. They start dating again quickly, not because they're over you, but because they need to prove to themselves that they made the right choice. But what surprises them? Everyone else feels wrong, not because you were perfect, but because their nervous system got used to your specific energy. Imagine this scenario. They're sitting across from someone perfectly nice on a first date. This person doesn't ask deep questions that make them uncomfortable. They don't expect emotional availability or future planning. By all logical standards, this should be a better match. But their body tells a different story. They feel bored, disconnected, like they're acting in a play they don't want to be in. What's really happening is that their system is comparing everyone to the emotional intensity they shared with you. Even though that intensity scared them, it also made them feel alive in a way they'd never experienced before. These new people feel flat by comparison, like drinking water when you use a wine. They don't realize that what they're really missing isn't you specifically, but the version of themselves that existed when they were with you. The version that felt things deeply, even if it terrified them. Now comes the most surprising part. They start idealizing the relationship they just ended, not the real relationship with challenges, but sanitized version where only the good parts remain. They remember your laugh, but forget the conversations about commitment that made them panic. This selective memory isn't intentional manipulation. It's their brain's way of protecting them from the full weight of what they lost. In their mind, you become this perfect person who they somehow couldn't appreciate at the time. They remember how you always knew exactly what to say when they had a bad day, but they forget how they used to shut down when you tried to comfort them. What makes this idealization so dangerous is that it prevents them from learning anything real about themselves. Instead of recognizing that they sabotage a good thing because of their own fears, they create stories where you were just too good to them or the timing was wrong. And then it hits. They begin to feel regret mixed with confusion. Not regret about the breakup itself, but regret about their inability to show up differently. Deep down, they know they sabotaged something good, but admitting that would mean facing the very vulnerability they've spent years avoiding. This regret doesn't hit them all at once. It creeps in slowly, triggered by small moments. Maybe they see a couple laughing together the way you two used to, or they hear a song that reminds them of a happy memory. But these thoughts are quickly followed by panic, because caring means being vulnerable to pain. The real kicker? They start realizing that the very things they complained about were actually signs of a healthy relationship. When you asked about their day, they felt interrogated. When you wanted to plan a future together, they felt trapped. But now they're starting to understand that these weren't attacks on their freedom. They were invitations to intimacy. You weren't trying to control them. You were trying to love them. What happens next depends entirely on their level of self-awareness. Some avoidants stay stuck in this cycle, jumping from relationship to relationship, always finding reasons why it doesn't work. But others start to notice the pattern. They realize that the problem isn't finding the right person. It's learning to stay present when things get real. Many avoidants eventually realize that the person they pushed away was actually offering them exactly what they needed: patience, consistency, and unconditional positive regard. But they couldn't receive it because their nervous system interpreted love as danger. This realization often comes months or even years later, long after the opportunity for repair has passed. But listen carefully to this. Their internal journey isn't about you, and it's not your responsibility to wait for their awakening. Understanding what happens in their mind after a breakup isn't meant to give you hope for reconciliation. It's meant to give you peace. When you realize that their behavior was never a reflection of your worth, you can finally stop taking their emotional unavailability personally. And this is where everything changes. Because there's one final blow that completely shatters their defensive walls. There's a moment in every avoidant's life when their carefully constructed emotional fortress comes crashing down, not through dramatic confrontation or endless arguments, but through one devastating realization that cuts deeper than any weapon could. This isn't about revenge or malice. It's about the moment when reality breaks through their defenses and shows them exactly what they've lost and what they'll never get back. The avoidant is used to people fighting for them, chasing after their attention, begging for their love, trying to tear down their walls with desperation and emotion. They built their entire identity around being the one who cares less, the one who can walk away, the one who holds all the power in relationships. They know exactly how to give just enough attention to keep someone hooked, then pull back just enough to maintain control. But the final blow doesn't come from someone who's angry or hurt. It comes from someone who's done. Someone who's seen through the games, understood the patterns, and made a choice that the avoidant never saw coming. This person doesn't scream or cry or beg for answers. Instead, they do something far more devastating. They simply stop caring. When an avoidant realizes that their emotional distance and withdrawal tactics no longer hold any power, when they understand that someone has simply stopped caring about their approval, something inside them shatters. It's the realization that their greatest fear has come true. They become irrelevant. The person who used to analyze their every word, who used to wait for their texts, who used to light up when they showed the smallest bit of attention, now looks at them with the same energy they'd give a stranger on the street. This shift catches the avoidant completely off guard. They're used to people being either desperately in love with them or furiously angry at them. Both emotions give them power because both mean they still matter. But indifference, that's a foreign language they don't know how to speak. Suddenly, all their tried and true methods breadcrumbing, future faking, showing just enough vulnerability, none of it works anymore because the other person simply isn't interested in playing the game. What makes this particularly devastating is that the avoidant can feel the authenticity of this indifference. This isn't someone playing hard to get or using reverse psychology. This is genuine, complete emotional detachment. The person has processed their feelings, worked through their disappointment, and genuinely moved on. They're not pretending not to care. They actually don't care anymore. And that reality hits the avoidant like a freight train because they realize that all their power was built on other people's emotional investment in them. The avoidant suddenly finds themselves in a position they put so many others in, desperately wanting attention from someone who's emotionally unavailable. They start obsessing over every interaction, replaying conversations, analyzing tone of voice and body language the way their former partners used to analyze theirs. They find themselves checking if the person has read their messages, feeling genuine hurt when they're left on read, getting anxious when they don't hear back quickly enough. The irony is devastating. The avoidant, who spent years rolling their eyes at people who needed constant reassurance, who mocked others for being needy or clingy, suddenly understands what it feels like to be on the receiving end of emotional unavailability. They get a taste of their own medicine, and it's bitter. But unlike their former partners who had hoped that things could change, the avoidant is dealing with someone who has already decided that they can't or won't change. The second part of this final blow is the recognition of lost potential. They start to understand, often too late, that the person who became indifferent to them wasn't just anyone. This was someone special. This was someone who saw past their walls, who understood their wounds, who was willing to love them despite their defensive patterns. This was someone who didn't try to fix them or change them, but genuinely accepted them as they were, while still hoping they might grow. Now that person is looking at them like they're nothing special, like they're just another person who couldn't access emotional intimacy. The avoidant starts to see themselves through this person's eyes, and they don't like what they see. They see someone who had everything handed to them on a silver platter: love, acceptance, understanding, patience, and threw it all away because they were too scared to be vulnerable. This realization brings a unique type of regret that haunts avoidants for years. The final and most crushing element is the silence that follows. There's no dramatic goodbye, no angry speech, no tearful confrontation. There's just nothing. The person who once cared deeply about them simply stops reaching out, stops checking in, stops hoping for change. Their social media goes unviewed. Their messages go unanswered, not out of spite, but out of genuine disinterest. This silence is louder than any argument could ever be. It's the sound of a door closing permanently, of a chapter ending without fanfare, of being forgotten by someone who once considered them unforgettable. The avoidant, who always prided themselves on being able to walk away first, discovers what it feels like to be left behind, not in anger, but in indifference. In the end, the final blow that crushes an avoidant's ego isn't delivered with malice or revenge. It's delivered through the simple act of someone choosing themselves. When a person decides that their peace is more valuable than the avoidance potential, when they stop investing emotional energy in someone who can't reciprocate, when they move on without looking back, it destroys the avoidant sense of power and control more completely than any confrontation ever could. If you're someone who's reached a point of indifference with an avoidant, this is your validation that choosing yourself wasn't cruel, it was necessary. And if you're the avoidant watching someone become indifferent to you, let this be your wake-up call. The people who truly see you and love you despite your walls are rare. Don't let your ego push them into indifference, because once they get there, the road back is nearly impossible to travel. Now you understand the full journey, from the moment they lose you, through their stages of regret, to that final realization that changes everything. Remember, this isn't about getting them back. It's about understanding why letting go is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do. If this helped you see things differently, hit that like button and subscribe for more psychology insights that help you understand yourself and others better. Take care of your heart. And remember, you deserve someone who chooses you without having to lose you first.